The Romans had a saying, fortune favors the bold. For the suave banker leaving a promising career in a major global bank to come and assume the post of finance minister in a troubled third world country was a bold decision indeed. And true to the spirit of the Roman poet, fortune smiled upon the banker. But Lady Fortune can be quite fickle, as the banker may or may not have learned. This week on The Turnaround, the early years of Shaukat Aziz. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of The Turnaround. I'm Khurram Hussain. The early years of the Musharraf regime saw a number of daunting challenges facing the economy. In order to face these challenges, Shaukat Aziz, then finance minister, developed a three-pronged strategy that sought 1. Rescheduling of Pakistan's external debt to bring down the burden of debt servicing, 2. Accession to an IMF program to get a seal of approval for the resumption of capital inflows, and 3. A series of laws and legislative acts to provide a framework to attract foreign investment and accelerate the privatization program. This week, we take a look at the first of these pillars, the 3 rounds of Paris Club debt reschedulings. The government of Pakistan retained the consulting services of the sovereign advisory arm of UBS, a Switzerland-based bank. We spoke to Sebastian Espinoza, who had led the team at UBS for 3 years, advising on Pakistan's Paris Club debt rescheduling from 2000 till 2003. Sebastian, can you give us a snapshot of the major debt reschedulings undertaken by Pakistan during the time that you worked on the team?
Pakistan undertook 3 Paris Club restructurings. The first one took place in January 1999, and that was the agreement that after that followed the bond restructuring. After that, Pakistan returned to the Paris Club in January 2000, which coincided with the period of the IMF programs at the time. So the maturities falling due during the life of the IMF programs were restructured. So it was essentially temporary debt relief. The third Paris Club agreement, standby arrangements, and the ESAF in 1999 set the scene, if you like, for the government to seek a much more concessional debt, which formed the bulk of Pakistan's Paris Club debt, was restructured over 30 years. And this really was an extraordinary agreement, which went well beyond what Pakistan was eligible under the general rules used by the Paris Club.
Sebastian, the first of these reschedulings, the one that took place in 1999, is of some interest for a number of reasons. I mean, it was the most urgent issue facing Shaukat Aziz upon his arrival in Pakistan. And then there was this question of first rescheduling the outstanding Eurobonds before any Paris Club debt could be rescheduled. Could you tell us how this worked out?
Yes. I think this really is one of the factors which makes the Pakistani experience so. Now, the way this is done is through a clause within Paris Club agreements called the comparability of treatment clause, which makes the debt relief being offered to the Paris Club agreement dependent on the sovereign debtor seeking, or that first Paris Club agreement was that Pakistan seek comparable debt relief from its bondholders. A sovereign bond was restructured in modern times, in fact, but also the first time it was done within the context of a Paris Club agreement and of its comparability of treatment obligations.
Sebastian, you're saying that Pakistan had to first restructure its Eurobonds before asking the Paris Club for anything at all. And this was the first time ever, anywhere in the world, that such a demand had been placed upon a borrower?
Certainly in the case of sovereign bonds, absolutely. And it's because of that, attention internationally. Therefore, that's why it's so important. Process was an approach of the Paris Club in January 1999. Obviously, that was preceded the whole framework which surrounds an IMF program. The government had made contact with its bilateral creditors, and discussions began at that point. In terms of the bond restructuring, which took place in late 1999.
Okay, clearly the IMF had an important role to play in Pakistan's approach to the Paris Club. The role began with a letter sent from the IMF to the Paris Club in December 1999, certifying that Pakistan's new economic team was serious about pursuing a reform program that would enhance Pakistan's ability to service its debt. We asked Mohsin Khan from the IMF about this letter. This is how he explained it.
The program was agreed here in Islamabad. At that point, the Paris Club would ask, because the Paris Club would not do any restructuring without a program in place. Okay? That's the rule of Paris Club. So I would say that based on the experiences that I know, because I'm not that familiar with that particular incident, but more generally, what happens is the following: that a program is approved, and then the Paris Club asks for the IMF's views, and we do write a letter. It's called an assessment letter, and that's done on a normal basis. So it's a very regular thing that we write the letter to the Paris Club saying we have agreed on a program and the government is committed to do this. What we're saying is in a sense, to the question, do you believe the government will carry out this program, if you like? The answer is yes, because we would not agree to a program if we did not believe that the government would carry out this program. And indeed, ex post, we were right. They carried out the program and they got the tranches, and this idea of the one tranche country, which Prime Minister Shaukat Aziz was determined to destroy, that myth, or not myth, a fact, this perception in the world that Pakistan was a one tranche country, that they drew one tranche and the program collapsed. That disappeared.
So the IMF plays an important role in any country's relations with its external creditors, simply by certifying whether or not that country's economic managers are seriously committed to the kinds of policies that would enhance the country's creditworthiness. Sebastian, were each of the three Paris Club debt reschedulings that Pakistan undertook underwritten by an IMF program?
Well, in fact, yes. In fact, the second Paris Club agreement, which was put in place in January 2001, which I think was approved in November 2000, was always seen as a...
But the biggest and most important of the Paris Club debt reschedulings was the one that took place in December 2001, coming in at a walloping $12.5 billion and taking place shortly after Pakistan had been resurrected as a close ally of the superpower. More on that next. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about Pakistan's Paris Club debt reschedulings. Now, it's important to understand how much of this work had actually begun during the second Nawaz Sharif government, preceding the arrival of the military government. The first Paris Club agreement had been signed in January 1999 and served as the basis for the rescheduling that actually took place in January 2000. But it's also important to note that some of the conditions in that agreement of 1999 proved very difficult for the Nawaz Sharif government to meet. I spoke with S. N. Iqbal about this, and this is how the conversation went. In January 1999, the government of which you were a member rescheduled December 1999, which is the subsequent government.
No. You see, all...
The rescheduling did not take place until December 6, 2000.
All the rescheduling had taken place around January, February. The only thing which was required to be done was for the representatives to come. Paris and London Club had been done. Then those agreements have to be... I think it was primarily because of this political change in the country. Because it is then for their convenience. It depends on their convenience when they opt to come. But it is a matter of record, because if those agreements had not been done...
Were you involved with this effort to negotiate?
The finance ministry was involved.
Were you involved in
No, I was not involved.
At all. Did you held of what was going on that front at that time? They had required the government to ensure comparability of treatment between sovereign and private creditors. And they were requiring that Pakistan first restructure its Eurobonds. 3 Eurobonds that were coming due between December and March. Do you recall that?
No, I don't recall. Because I was not involved in the mechanics of these negotiations. Yeah.
In fact, shortly before the coup, Moody's and Bloomberg were both anticipating a default by Pakistan on one or more of its euro bonds due later that same year. Pakistan had enough money to pay for those euro bonds from its reserves. But were we to do so, the Paris Club would not have rescheduled any of our debts, arguing that we have not ensured comparability of treatment between privately held bonds and bilaterally owed debt. But there's a bigger question to consider here. Sebastian, to what extent were Pakistan's problems with capital inflows at that time, between 97 and 2000, the result of global conditions? I mean, wasn't there a tendency or a trend on the part of investors to pull out of emerging markets, sparking crises in many countries besides Pakistan?
Sure, oh, yes, certainly from 97 to 2000, yes. Initially started by the East Asian crisis, and obviously there was a Russian crisis in 98.
So you're saying that Pakistan's problems with its creditors actually grew out of the Asian financial crisis of 1997?
Oh, certainly. I mean, obviously one thing which policymakers have been, and the experience with the East Asian crisis, which began in 97, really did show that there was.
So contagion is obviously the process through which financial crises can jump from one region into another. And you're saying Pakistan's problems in 1999 were largely the result of contagion from the East Asian financial crisis of 1997.
It was certainly a major contributing factor alongside the situation with India at the time. But that was really the main factor which prompted the balance of payments crisis in Pakistan in 1998.
But if Pakistan's first bond restructuring took place under very adverse global conditions, many people point out that the last and the biggest one, the one in December 2001, valued at about $12.5 billion, and you worked on that one, that one took place under global conditions or global markets that were flush with liquidity, and Pakistan was no longer a pariah state in the eyes of the superpower. Now, to what extent was the process of rescheduling driven along by these realities?
The pillars for that concessional and extraordinary restructuring in December 2001 of that restructuring really was a reflection on the success that the government had these far-reaching and much-needed reforms in Pakistan.
Okay, Sebastian, thank you so much for joining us. The three Paris Club debt reschedulings of that time were a vital part of the government's growth strategy. They allowed us to shed some of the staggering debt servicing costs that we had picked up over the course of the 1990s. Underlying each of these agreements was an IMF program, and smiling down from above was Lady Fortune. But Lady Fortune's smile was about to turn into a frown. Next week on The Turnaround, in and out of the IMF.